favorite movie as a kid? You know, the one you'd make your mom record on a tape and replay over and over again until even your parents knew the script by heart? Well, for me it was Snow White, but that's besides the point. The point is, from a young age, media plays an important role in our lives. Obviously, what we watch changes as we grow up, our taste shifting from more fantastical to something more realistic. We seek out ourselves in the media we consume. So, at the apex of our high school career and on the brink of graduation, you may be reminiscing on some high school classics, like High School Musical, or maybe Grease. Ah, yes, stories of star-crossed lovers from opposing cliques who somehow find a way to be together. A universal tale, right? Well, yes, they are. But not in the way you might think. You see, my experience growing up with these films was probably a little different from yours. As a queer person, I never really saw myself on screen. Not explicitly, anyways. And to clarify, I don't mean queer as in weird, I mean queer as in gay. Despite its complicated history, queer has largely been reclaimed as a word interchangeable with gay, and I personally use the two as such. As I went into my tween years and began to figure some stuff out about myself, I eventually went looking for media that was relatable to me and what I was going through, only to find out that there really wasn't any, especially not for my age group. And this isn't an uncommon experience for queer kids either. So what do you do when there's no accessible media made for you? You have to make it yourself. So yeah, everything's kind of gay. I mean, not really, but it can be. You see, for centuries, queer people haven't really been anyone's target audience. In fact, it's really been the opposite. Media was never made for us because queer people were seen as wrong or immoral. This ideology, though certainly improving as time goes on, still lingers in society, thus resulting in a great drought of queer media that isn't deemed as too offensive, raunchy, or mature to the general public. Queer people were forced into isolation and thus had to create their own spaces. If media wasn't going to be made directly for us, we would have to find it in what's already available. Thus enter queer subtext, a lifeline for gay people everywhere. No longer must you wait for the explicit "I am gay" character in your favorite show to feel validated. With the right analysis and tropes, you can find queer coding in almost anything, regardless of whether it was intentional or not. Implicit queer representation, the kind that we find and create ourselves, often ends up being much more valuable to us due to its abundance and easy accessibility. I think this concept is best explained through examples, though, so let's talk about one of the most well-known authors of all time, Shakespeare. Speculation of the man being queer himself aside, I want to rather focus on his works. More specifically, I want to talk about Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, I know, bold claim, right? I hear you saying, Fiona, this is a love story between a man and a woman. How can this be gay? And to that I answer, subtext. Let's consider the plot for a moment. Two people, genders aside, from two different sectors of society find each other and fall in love at first sight. But they know society would never approve of their union. Their families in particular would supposedly be furious if they found out their children were together, so they're forced to hide it from everyone. They can only see each other late at night, sneaking into each other's gardens, or in some obscure location where they know no one would see because they fear banishment, exile, and shunning from their own families. But they couldn't help who they loved, and they were never sorry for it. They were just sorry that society would never accept them as they were. This is a very common queer narrative. Themes about forbidden love, the star-crossed lovers trope, and secret relationships all go hand in hand to form the basis of queer coding. These are themes that are abundant in media of all kinds because, let's face it, we as a society are hopeless romantics. We also love a good underdog story. Combine those two, and what do you get? A whole lot of books, movies, and TV shows at your disposal. For a long time, stories like these were the closest queer people got to seeing themselves represented. If we take a step back and look at it, Romeo and Juliet's love story is a queer one in the original context of the definition, weird and strange to those around them. It's not literally gay, but if we look through the basic themes, the subtext is there. Whether or not Shakespeare intended the coding to be there or not doesn't really matter, because lack of intention doesn't take away the audience's feeling of being seen, and that's what's most important. And having one of the most famous love stories of all time have a queer interpretation of it is pretty neat. Let's look at a more modern example now. Disney, more specifically Disney villains. A surprising topic mayhaps, but a crucial one nonetheless. The queer coding of Disney villains occurred frequently during its Renaissance era in the 50s and 60s, and in this case, it was actually often intentional. Think back to your favorite Disney film. The Little Mermaid, The Lion King, Peter Pan. Chances are, the main villain was likely imbued with stereotypically queer traits. Disney villains are known for their extravagant outfits, dramatics, vanity, and acts of arguable evil-doing. Moreover, the female villains are often depicted as more masculine types, think Cruella or Maleficent. The male villains are often depicted as more feminine types, think Hades, Hook, or Scar. This isn't speculation either. Ursula was confirmed to have been based off the popular drag queen Divine, both in mannerisms and appearance, though she received no credit or glory from the studio. By coding their villains in this way, they're pushing the narrative that these traits are somehow wrong or even evil, something that the hero of the story needs to overcome and defeat in order to get their happy ending. That is the very nature of a villain, after all. Immoral, resented, shunned, all things queer people were seen to be as well. Now, the depiction of queerness as evil is by no means good bread. In this case, the intention was harmful. So why do I bring this up? To introduce the power of interpretation. Hollywood dishes queer people a mockery of their existence. So we turn that into celebration. The best we can, anyways. If we take a look at the villain archetype as a whole, there's a lot of inherently queer themes. A social reject who's isolated, shunned, and typically has something that sets them apart from the rest, something that makes others angry or afraid. Villains are, unfortunately, queer in the original sense, strange to those around them. And in response, these characters were reclaimed as icons of the LGBT community. Personally, I was obsessed with Maleficent and the Evil Queen as a kid. Despite not having the words to put to it yet, I felt a connection towards them that was just different from what I felt towards the heroes. Now that I'm older, I have the words to put to that. An adoration for the odd and different, a toast to the outcasts. After all, the ones are pretty badass, right? In a time where queer wealth was slim to none, diamonds were made from the coal they were given. Sometimes, intention can be disregarded in favor of a positive interpretation of the work. It won't undo the larger scope of harm caused by these movies, but it's a key example of queer people doing the most with the little they're given, and finding representation in even the most unlikely places. For our final example, I want to shift away from the implicit and into the mainstream explicit, canon queer characters and the subsequent problems that can often arise. Let's take a look at the show Riverdale and its supporting character, Kevin. Kevin is the best friend of the main protagonist, Betty, and his sexuality is made clear from the start of the show. In theory, this is great, but in practice, Riverdale fails the diversity department in several ways. For one, Kevin's a supporting character, and for the first 3 seasons or so, was the only openly queer character on the show. He falls into the trope of the gay best friend, or GBF for short, a trope that commodifies gay people as a plot device. His main narrative purpose is to support and cheer on the main characters, while receiving slim screen time and a limited amount of relevant plot lines. And what he does get is typically limited to directing the school musical or sleeping around with a lot of guys. So while the main characters of the show get to develop and drive the plot, Kevin falls flat as a character, leaving him feeling fairly two-dimensional in comparison to his counterparts. The problem with this kind of representation is that, while technically canon, it's failing to deliver the proper representation promised to their audiences. It's surface level, and it still claims to point for diversity, meaning it gets the glory without the hard work. Additionally, much like the Disney villains, this kind of representation relies solely on trophy stereotypes that can often do more harm than good. Now, I'm not saying that canon representation is bad, of course not. Implicit queer representation of themes and characters will never get rid of the importance of explicit queer rep. And queer representation today is much more abundant and accessible than ever before in history, but it's still largely confined to queer-specific content spaces. Mainstream media, solely relying on these trophy stereotypes, continues to isolate queer people and further prevent the normalization of queerness as a whole. The normalization of queerness as a whole. And we are getting there. Shows like Riverdale are the baby steps needed to get to true acceptance and equality. Undoing centuries of bigotry is no easy feat, and it can't be done overnight. The queer representation I see today gives me hope for a very bright future, but we're just not there yet. My point is this. Queer people are good at finding their own representation, but that doesn't mean we should have to. And we are making progress. We are getting there. However, in the meantime, all we ask for is a little bit of respect and understanding. Understanding that queer people are rarely given representation on a silver platter, and what we do get, we have to fight for. In a time where we get very little, we have to turn crumbs to cake. So, yeah, everything's probably kind of gay to us. And you don't have to agree. That's the beauty of interpretation. Differing interpretations don't discredit or attack anyone else's, but they may just open your mind to a new way of thinking you hadn't considered before. At the end of the day, we're all searching for ourselves in the media we consume